Earth was a joke to the Empire, then humans teleported their fleet into the war. The metal tore without an engine flash. Space split flat above the marble world, leaving heavy cruisers sitting between the unshielded corridors of a hostile grid. No flares, no warnings, no lane exits. Earth was a joke to the Empire, an unmapped sector left off the Imperial charts for cycles. Then humans teleported their fleet into the war. The massive gray hulls of the human warships locked into the gaps of the Sundaran formation. They did not exit from the deep space gates. They sat steady at point-blank range, their weapons tracking the unshielded plates of the blockade fleet before the regional defense grid could register the shift. The distance between the fleets had disappeared. The Empire spent 9,000 cycles studying our charts. They missed the parts we didn't put on paper. Stay close. Earlier that day, the basalt chamber on the capital station world smelled of sharp ozone and military order. High Warden Malachar Vex stood before the central display, his stone armor catching the red monitor glare. His chest was heavy with medals from many planetary campaigns. To his right, the feathered representatives of the border world watched the layout with shaking hands. The display showed their blue home, surrounded by a ring of 400 Sundaran capital ships. The local assembly had voted to reject the border appeal. The non-intervention rule was clear under imperial law. The border race had fallen short on resource shipments, and their sector was now marked for annexation. Malachar Vex did not look at the representatives as he updated the registry. He viewed the planetary defense grid as a simple administrative entry to be cleared from the ledger. Humanity signed the Mutual Defense Accord with our people long ago, the border speaker whispered, her head low. They will answer our call. Vex let out a sharp, clicking sound from his throat. The human navy was a minor collection of kinetic vessels, trapped light years away behind the traditional transit gates. By the time their scouts cleared the sublight lanes, the entire world would be a compliant province. The ledger did not accept sentiment. It only tracked compliance. Vex turned his back on the diplomats. He signed the final activation order on his data slate, sending the fleet deployment schedules to the Vanguard commanders already waiting in orbit. The decision was recorded, sealed, and filed away into the high registry. The bureaucracy of the Empire moved forward without a pause. Across the sector, inside the lunar shadow of a cold moon, Commander Alina Vance sat at an unpolished wooden desk on the carrier bridge. She had spent 34 years in deep space theater coordination, her silver hair cut straight at the jaw. She sipped bitter root water from a porcelain cup, her eyes fixed on the target vectors flashing across her main screen. The Sundaran blockade fleet had already commenced the destruction of the secondary planetary outposts. The enemy fleet has formed a dense grid, analyst Priya Patel reported, shifting the tracking tracks on her terminal. She adjusted her plastic-rimmed glasses as the data columns refreshed. They are operating under the old rules. They expect our vessels to arrive through the Orion Gateway, which keeps their defense arrays facing outward. Vance did not raise her voice. She set her porcelain cup down precisely on a small rubber coaster and nodded. The Empire believed that distance was an absolute wall. They built their strategy on the assumption that an enemy must sail down the lines they controlled. They think the map is the reality, she said. They think the lanes protect them. The deep arrays on the lunar surface have achieved full synchronization, Commander Thorne said, his hand resting on the core matrix keys. He checked the power line levels across the primary system grid. We have the exact positions of the Sundaran warships. The alignment is ready. Activate the displacement fields, Vance said. Her voice carried the weight of a long silence. Let them finish their warning broadcast. We will drop exactly into the gaps they left behind. Thorne engaged the initialization breakers, sending power flowing from the deep moon foundries into the primary transit network. The deck did not shake, but the low hum of the matrix keys altered its pitch. The system was locked onto the coordinates of the hostile armada. Back in the border system, the Sundaran flagship sent a final demand across an open frequency. Vex demanded immediate surrender of the global defense grid within minutes, promising total system liquidation if the planet resisted. The regional officers watched the countdown indicators drop toward the final mark. Their victory was mathematically certain. Then the background radiation levels around the blockade fleet dropped by a massive margin. The ambient energy did not rise. It was drawn rapidly into a localized vacuum between the warships. For decades, Imperial sensors had logged a minor energy spike coming from the human zone. Sundaran technicians had dismissed the reading as simple industrial waste. It was not waste, it was the hum of a species that had spent decades learning how to move mass without transit gates. The system parameters were being rewritten from the outside, collapsing the space between the worlds into a single point. High Warden, Technician Chull shouted, his slate skin turning a dull gray as he stared at the terminal runes. Massive spatial anomalies have formed directly inside our defensive circle. The distance to the incoming targets is gone. Vex stepped toward the map, his visual ridges flattening. He struck the console frame with his gauntlet. Identify the jump gates they opened. Order the front batteries to face the perimeter lanes. There are no gates, Chull cried, his hands shaking over the controls. They did not use the lanes. They are already here. The Sundering command loops collapsed in an instant. The space between the capital ships tore open, and 150 heavy human dreadnoughts materialized in the gaps of the blockade grid. The automated missile pods dropped into position right beside the Imperial flagships. The Sundering shields, built entirely to block long-range incoming fire from the system edge, were completely useless. The human vessels were sitting directly inside the defensive bubbles of their prey. The bronze hulls of the Empire were exposed from the inside out. Commander Thorne depressed the operational matrix keys on the carrier bridge. Vance watched her main display turn into a falling cascade of red target pins. The human point-blank batteries and railguns opened fire from less than a mile away, their heavy kinetic slugs tearing into the unshielded flank plates of the Imperial hulls. The structural destruction was immediate, flat, and absolute. They came, they dropped, they cut the line. Sundering flagships fractured down their center seams before their bridge crews could direct their weapons inward. The human cruisers did not move across the system charts. They simply altered the physical coordinates of the theater. The automated pods fired rows of short-range projectiles that left the bronze hulls burning in a tight, overlapping cluster. Heavy kinetic rods punched straight through the command modules, severing the power lines and venting the life support systems into the cold dark. Vex felt his flagship shudder as a railgun slug shattered the core reactor line. The command room filled with the sharp stench of burning insulation and failing power grids. His tactical display went dark, leaving only the amber emergency indicators flashing against the basalt walls. The crew abandoned their terminals as the hull plates began to buckle under the point-blank impact rows. Vex reached for his personal emergency kit, his stone fingers slipping against the latch as the secondary explosions tore through the lower decks. The flagship was dead before it could return a single shot. The entire engagement lasted exactly 18 minutes. Of the vast vanguard fleet that Vex had brought to enforce the will of the High Council, most were reduced to drifting scrap metal before an order to retreat could be broadcast. The human carrier sat perfectly still among the smoking ruins of the Armada, its main weapons already silent as its engineers returned the deployment arrays to standby. The tactical monitors on Vance's console cleared the residual fire signatures, leaving only the white markers of the Alliance vessels intact. Malachor Vex survived the destruction of his command ship inside an armored capsule. As his pod drifted through the frozen field of shattered plate arrays, he looked through the small viewport at the unpainted gray flank of the human supercarrier. No victory announcements came over the open radio. No grand declarations echoed from Earth. There was only a cold, loaded silence that felt heavier than the wreckage. The High Council removed the border sector from the annexation registry within hours of the transmission. Vex signed the emergency systems log from his drifting survival pod, knowing his command career was finished under Imperial law. He looked at his slate-gray hands, realizing the Empire had calculated its strength by the size of its charts, while a quiet neighbor had measured its survival by the depth of its preparation. The layout of the entire war had changed in less than a single day, broken by a race that refused to use the gates. Vance set down her porcelain cup on the edge of the unpolished wooden console. The bitter root liquid had settled cold, leaving a dark rim inside the white clay. She turned off the communication display, leaving the local sector map blank and unmapped. The carrier engines fired once to alter its vector. The heavy hull turned toward the dark rim of the system. The unpainted metal disappeared into the black shadow of the moon. Only the burning scrap of the Vanguard remained in the quiet.